how you doing? And welcome to NLP Talks with Laura Evans, a podcast for people looking to unleash their potential in business and life. I'm Laura Evans, international trainer of NLP and host for this podcast. Join me in Series 2 for a magical insight into the training room, learn about NLP and hear firsthand from our students about how NLP is changing their lives. Stay tuned. Hey, how you doing? And thanks for listening. I'm Laura Evans and welcome to NLP Talks with Laura Evans. I'm the founder and lead trainer here at Unleash Your Potential and of course, your host for this podcast series. Now today I'm going to be discussing a technique called parts integration and in particular how you can better conquer that feeling of indecisiveness. You know, if you struggle to make decisions sometimes, you're going to be interested in what I've got to say today. Maybe you spend a lot of time arguing with yourself, or maybe being torn between option A and option B. This is the kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about alongside how this can help you get better clarity. So let's get started. So what is parts integration? Well, it's a linguistic tool that allows us to resolve inner conflict that exists at the unconscious level. Now, it was created by Tad James. My courses are accredited by the ABNLP, the American Board of NLP, probably the largest governing body in the world. And Tad looked at a technique in the traditional NLP toolbox called the 6-step reframe and noticed how it got inconsistent results. And I don't know about you, but if I can ever find a way of improving something, then I'm always looking to be able to do that. And that's kind of what Tad did with the parts integration process. And so you'll only get the proper parts integration process from a trainer that's been trained under the ABNLP governing body. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I make mountains out of molehills. I will make a decision feel like it is a life decision when sometimes it really isn't. Now, I don't struggle with that so much these days, but I used to struggle with it in a really, really big way. It would drain me of energy. People that have big conflicts at the unconscious level tell me that they have poor quality sleep. Sometimes their unconscious mind can even wake them up in the middle of the night as it's trying to wrestle with itself. Now, of course, at night, we all go to bed and we go to sleep. But that doesn't mean to say that your unconscious mind also goes to sleep. In fact, it doesn't. It is always whirling away, keeping you breathing, keeping your heart rate moving, and also filing away the events of the day. Now, sometimes that can take quite a bit of effort to get that metaphorical filing cabinet open and put all the files away. I remember I had a filing job at the very early part of my career when I was 21 and that was hard work. And so sometimes it takes effort for the unconscious mind to do that. Now, sometimes if you're wrestling with a decision, your unconscious mind can also have this debate with itself. Unbeknown to you, you're fast asleep. But actually, it has this, like I say, debate, and it can be almost like an argument with itself. So let's just stop for a moment to think about why that might be and what parts are really all about. Well, parts are part of the unconscious mind. Tad believes that when it starts for us, whether you believe that started at birth or if you believe in past lives, then that might be several lifetimes ago. But wherever it starts for us, the neurology is whole. And what happens over time is significant emotional events happen. And you heard me talk about that back in episode 4 around significant emotional events. Go and check it out if you haven't heard it. And significant emotional events essentially can sometimes lead to parts of the neurology breaking off. Now, obviously, metaphorically, there isn't a bit of you that falls off, but that's where we're at. And what sometimes happens is parts are in conflict. So every part has a flip side, an alter ego, a flip side of the same coin. Because if there wasn't, there wouldn't be this conflict. You know, a conflict might transpire, and this is a conflict that you're aware of, but a conflict might be part of me believes I'm good enough, part of me doesn't. Part of me is confident, there's also part of me that might not be. These are very, very classic, obvious parts conflicts. Now, parts are different to limiting beliefs. We covered those back in episode 2, where a limiting belief is something that you believe about yourself all the time that disempowers you or holds you back in any way. A parts conflict in this particular context would be where some of the time you believe you're good enough and some of the time you don't. Now, in this example, both of these parts have almost like a set of behaviours, values, and things people would observe in you. I don't want to say minor personality because that's not really where we're at with this, but that's kind of how it might fit, a little bit like Jekyll and Hyde. So, for example, I used to have a parts conflict around confidence. Part of me believed I was confident and part of me didn't. Now, if you were talking to me on a day when the part of me that believed I was confident was in charge of my neurological system, so to speak, then I'd come across very confidently. I'd be stood up, right? My confidence would be there in my voice and all that kind of stuff. However, if you caught me on a day when I was not confident, then you would hear that I was a little bit more hesitant perhaps in my voice. I wouldn't be sat up straight. I might be slouched and all those kind of things. And that's where this whole Jekyll and Hyde thing comes from. Let's say, for example, 90% of the time I believe I'm confident, but there's just this little part of me that sometimes believes I'm not. This is where you might observe someone's behaviour and think, wow, she's normally really confident, but today she's not. I wonder what's wrong with her, what's going on? And it literally just could be that different parts are in charge of the system. Now, you can't assess like how much of the time one part is in charge of the other, and I'm going to make some numbers up, but they are genuinely made up. But if 90% of the time one part was in charge of the system and 10% the other part was, that would give fairly consistent results and outcomes. Desirable or not is irrelevant, but it would give that consistency. If you had more of what I call like a 50-50 conflict, now these numbers are made up for metaphorical purposes, but literally half the time they believed one thing and half the time they believed something else, that could be quite disconcerting both for the person and, if it was an employee of yours, for you as their manager going, hang on a minute, sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. Parts are a fascinating subject and lots of people struggle with them. They really, really do. Now, some of you, like I said earlier, will find that, you treat some decisions like it's a life decision and it really isn't. Whether you're going to have your sandwich on brown bread or white bread is really not a great big deal. But for some people, that might feel like a big challenge. Sometimes people get into analysis paralysis. This is the byproduct of someone that has one or more significant parts conflicts. They ruminate on decisions, and this debate is just paralyzing for them. And sometimes you don't even realize that a decision was a big decision until you've made it. That heavy feeling that you experience when you are struggling to make that decision. Sometimes you don't know it was there until it's gone, and then you think, oh, thank God I've made a decision. Making a decision is a good thing. Some people like to procrastinate over decision making and put decision making off. But at some point, you have to make a decision. Sometimes you'll hear people say, there's no such thing as a bad decision. What there is indecision. And you know what? Sometimes you just have to make a decision and get on with it, knowing that if it turns out not to be the best choice, you can always change your mind. You can always do something differently. What I'm going to do now is give you 3 top tips from our NLP toolkit that I think are really going to help you in this area. Now, unfortunately, it's not possible for me to demonstrate parts to you because I need you here to be able to do it. But nevertheless, let me give you some tips that will help with this very problem of indecision we've been talking about. Number 1. Sometimes you just have to decide to decide. And as bizarre as that might sound, sometimes you just need to be forced into making a decision, either because of a deadline or either because you just think, you know what, I'm running out of time. I'm just going to have to make the decision. There is nothing stopping you imposing like an artificial deadline on yourself. By the time I go to bed tonight, I need to have decided. Because once you've made a decision, that heaviness that you're probably currently experiencing will have started to lift and you can start to move forward. Sometimes you just have to have the courage and bravery to make the decision, execute the decision, and get on with it. So tip number 1 is, do you just need to give yourself a bit of tough love and just decide it's time to decide? Now, tip number 2 is, would talking it through or thinking it through help you decide? Now, our mind has all sorts of filters, and these filters are part of how your mind works. One set of filters are called meta programs, and they're filters of the unconscious mind that are powerful determinants of personality. Some of you may have heard of the work of Carl Jung many, many years ago, a Swiss psychiatrist, psychologist, general practitioner. I think he was also a student of Freud. I might have got some of that wrong, but that's who we're talking about. And a number of you will have heard of him under the tool of Myers-Briggs, which I used to use a lot when I was in HR. But the NLP community came along in the 70s and went, actually, do you know what? There's more than that. Carl Jung came up with 3 elements of personality and said if he knew the outcome of those, he could predict personality. Myers and Briggs, mother and daughter, came along and said, actually, we think there is a 4th. And then the NLP community came along and said, I think there's way more than that. And they created what we call 22, 24 meta programs. Now, one of these is called the information processing style. And in order to help you make better decisions, it's better for you to process this information in order to help you make a decision in the style that works for you. Some people are what we call internal processors, and they need the space to think about things by themselves only. There's no point in me whittering away in their ear when actually what they need is quiet space and time to think this through for themselves. Other people have a preference for what we call external processing, and they are the people that need to think or process best by thinking out loud. These are the kind of people that will want to borrow your ear, as the phrase goes, so that they can actually discuss something with you. I'm an external processor, and it used to frustrate my ex-husband hugely when I say to him, I need to think, what's your view on this topic? And I'd ask him a question and then proceed to answer the question myself, and then turn around and go, yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. And then I'd walk out the kitchen. And I remember one day him saying to me, did you actually want to know what I thought? And that's exactly the type of thing an external processor needs. So in order to help you best process the information to be able to make a decision, you should first understand, are you an internal processor or an external processor, and use the method of processing information that's going to best support you to make a decision. Tip number 3 is a model of thinking through 4 different angles. Now, our thinking is usually very habitual. We follow the same thinking patterns day in and day out. We look to solve problems in the same way each time we come across them, always applying the same logic and the same process. And sometimes, though, we'll find a different answer by thinking differently. Always thinking in the way you have means you'll always get the answer you always got. Of course, that's a play on the famous Albert Einstein quote. I used to have a strapline for my business called Change Your Thinking, Change Your Results. And this is exactly what we're talking about. If you continue to try to make decisions in the same way that you always have, if that doesn't give you a productive or efficient outcome and a sensible timescale, maybe it's time to mix things up. A model that we use on the Master Practitioner program is something called Cartesian logic. Now, this has been around for a very, very, very long time, and you don't need to know where it came from and its history to be able to use it. For those of you that are interested, it came from a bunch of nuns way back BC at some point. What you do need to know, though, are the 4 questions that we use. And what these nuns used to do was use these 4 questions to think about problems and other things. But in this context, decision-making on problems, they would use these 4 questions to ensure that they were looking at it from different angles. And perhaps this structure might mean that you're able to more efficiently make decisions by taking in a different perspective. So ask yourselves each one of the following 4 questions that I'm going to share with you next time you need to make a decision, and see what answers pop into your head. Perhaps if right now, as you're listening to this podcast, you have a decision that you need to make, maybe you could put this into practice straight away by listening to what I'm about to say. Listen to what I'm saying and let's see what pops into your head as you consider each of these 4 questions. Number 1, what would happen if you did? Number 2, what would happen if you didn't? Number 3, what wouldn't happen if you didn't? Number 4, what wouldn't happen if you didn't? Now, you can ask yourselves these questions anytime you like and capture the answers, perhaps scribble them on a little scrap of paper or something so that you can consider them. But here's the thing. Please, 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 can I make a request that you don't use these 4 questions to add to your analysis paralysis? My aim here is to help you think differently in order to find the answer that you need to find so that you can move on. Capture your answers, consider your answers, decide and move. So my question to you is this. When are you going to decide? That, of course, is a decision that you have to make for yourself. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode and thank you so much, as always, for joining me. I really, really appreciate you listening to this podcast. Please like, subscribe, and of course, share it with a friend if you think this would be useful. I very much look forward to having you back here for episode 8, which is the final episode in this particular series, when we publish that really soon. So thank you, take care, and I'll see you really soon.